The Honourable Member for Windsor West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and welcome back to the Chamber. I am here with profound sadness to pay tribute to Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, as my other colleagues have. I do want to stop and note on a positive note the 18th anniversary of Melanie Names Petra, who has worked with me on the Hill as a constituency assistant and legislative assistant, and a whole series of wonderful moments that we've had over 18 years of my 20 years here, and want to thank her and her family for all the work that they've done on behalf of Windsor, Ontario, Essex, and Canada, Madam Speaker. And as well, Madam Speaker, I do want to offer my condolences to the royal family. The Queen Mother was also a grandmother and great-grandmother. The royal family is certainly going through a lot of emotions, even recognizing the fact that they have to share this moment with the entire planet is very difficult in the public eye, and wishing them and their family the best during this difficult time. I also want to actually take note and thank, from Windsor, Mayor Drew Dilkens. Our mayor is showing leadership, again, including the public. There will be a public viewing the Queen's funeral at 5:45 a.m. on September 19th at City Hall Square outdoors. I want to thank Mayor Drew Dilkens for doing that. And as well, there'll be a public memorial service at All Saints Anglican Church at 6 p.m., which is right next to that area. Please RSVP for that. Of particular note will be the lead by the Essex and Kent Scottish Regiment. And to recognize, Madam Speaker, this year was the 80th year of Dieppe, where the Essex Scottish Kent played a leading part of the operations and suffered significant losses for the duty during the Second World War, which I will talk a little bit about now with regards to the Queen, and even connections as to why this is important for not only our country, our Parliament, and I think a little bit share about my experiences as well too. I have had the chance to meet the Queen in Toronto. I'll talk a little bit about that later, but want to note that part of my family came from England, and we grew up at the kitchen table. Experiences about what took place during the war, what took place with the royal family, and a number of different connections that just kind of take place. As my biological grandfather, John Clifford Addison, I didn't know him. I have his medals, and I have his soccer medals and war medals. He died on the HMS Scorpion in the fall of Burma. Was lucky that my grandmother, Irene Atwood, was able to remarry Fred Atwood. And he served in the Royal Navy on the Ark Royal, the McCallum, and my grandmother Irene and my mother Jean Masse, Jean Atwood at that time, they survived the bombing raids that were in London. And my mother just gifted me this last year actually a book, scrapbook that she made during this time and during her teen years of the Queen. So there's lots of papers and news articles going back actually going to the start of 70 years with regards to articles that were published in the British papers, official programs, and so forth, and I'll be sharing them on the 16th on my social media as I took pictures. And it's interesting through the eyes of my mother at that time to see all the work that went into this collection of materials. And I think that experience, translated later on with better understanding, because fortunately with Fred Atwood, he was a merchant marine, and I mentioned he served in the Royal Navy. He spent a lot of time serving for his country, but also coming to Canada here and at the kitchen table. I grew up with the big band music playing in the background, sitting at the kitchen table, my grandmother making scones and having tea, and talking about life in England, and recognizing Her Majesty's commitment during that wartime was part of the discussions, and as well too, clearly was a continuation of the life that they had in Canada, extended from over in England. And I think it's important that we recognize the duration of time that's taken place with regards to this tenure that she had lasting so long. So during her 70-year reign, she had 179 individuals served as her realm's prime ministers, 179, including 15 British and 12 Canadian prime ministers. Her first British prime minister, Winston Churchill, was born in 1874. And the last Prime Minister was Liz Truss, who was appointed by the late Queen just 2 days before her death, was born 101 years later in 1975. Now, as I mentioned, I had a chance to meet Her Royal Highness. It was in Toronto It was at her visitation, and before that I had been in Windsor, Ontario as a child when the Queen did visit. And, you know, like many of my age, we were on the side of the road as she drove by and waved. And so it was an interesting experience as a kid. Later on, she participated in a number of ceremonies in Windsor. Obviously, with the name of Windsor, there's a connection there that is very strong. And it's also, too, is that we're a border city that actually fought significantly in the War of 1812. We also were the place of the Underground Railroad, where when the British Empire finally got rid of slavery, many people came to our area for freedom from the United States. And so there's also recognition that there was a better position at that time because slavery is still one of those issues that languishes. And I'm hoping that the new king recognizes some of the still suffering that takes place from the awful state of slavery that has taken place over generations. And we have those connections. And so later on in life, it was Jack Layton who was supposed to attend a luncheon for the Queen at the Royal York, and Jack couldn't make it, so I got the call to go represent Jack, the former member for Toronto Danforth. And it was a summer day. It was 90 degrees, and I was staying in a hotel. And people know me, I'm not a very formal person, so for me to get in a tuxedo, which was a required fare, and I'm kind of describing it so people get an idea of what you go through. And I'm not very good at protocol either, but for me to get in a tuxedo is an accomplishment in itself, let alone when there's a blackout, because that took place at that time. And I had to go down the stairs of my hotel in 90-degree weather, 11 stories down, walk over to the Royal York, and then we were there huddled in the dark, a number of us, I think about 100 guests. And what they do is when you meet the Queen, and at that time also His Royal Highness the Duke of Edinburgh was there as well too, they send you, which is much needed for people like me, a protocol. This is what you expect, is that you get in line and your turn will come, you go to the Queen Mother, and then you just you do this type of a greeting, and then you go next to His Royal Highness, you do that, and then we move into another room, and then we have the event. Well, I'm terrible with protocol, so I got the right greeting for the Queen, but I got to His Royal Highness, I froze, and people are behind me, so I said, "Hey, man," and he smiled and laughed, and then I moved on. But the moment was kind of special because I was there to try to be as respectful of the protocol as possible, but it didn't matter. And then we moved into the next room, and the next room had luncheon where the Queen spoke, and it was interesting because she talked about Canada. She didn't talk about anything other than Canada. Talked about her visitations that she had across our country, whether it be in the Northwest Territories, whether it be in British Columbia, on the East Coast. She mentioned Windsor as well too, so we had that type of an exchange, and then the event was over. But it was interesting because, I grew up at the kitchen table with this, and when you listen to somebody as well, knowing, like, here's an interesting thing, is that she was the most traveled world leader, visiting 117 countries and almost 56 Commonwealth nations. She was also the first monarch to visit West Germany, China, South Africa, and other African nations, and almost every corner of Canada during her 22 visits. And so listening to somebody with that type of experience is always interesting in itself, and then having these kind of different connections was really important. And so I think that kind of a common element of that travel and what were taking place in a place in Canada was really special. Now, as I mentioned, the rain was not perfect, and I know, Madam Speaker, one of the things that I'm hoping to see is that we're going to see some reconciliation with our First Nations, and I'm hoping that King does that, and King Charles III will recognize that there's going to be more necessary to have reconciliation. It's one of the actually Truth and Reconciliation's points, and I'm looking forward to that. I think that would help not only just with myself, Madam Speaker, but also maybe young Canadians as we try to move forward, and there's still a connection to the monarchy in our country, but it needs to come with recognition of what's taken place in the past. And thank you, Madam Speaker, and condolences again to the royal family.